I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Sadly, Richard Brodsky is no longer legislating, but that doesn't mean he isn't still influencing policies and opinions. He's a senior fellow at Demos and at NYU's Wagner School, as well as a columnist at the Huffington Post and the Albany Times-Union. And I'm glad to say he's my guest today.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you. So you were a star in Albany. You really were, and I think it's missing you. But aside from that, do you believe it's a dysfunctional legislature?
No, not at all. That's one of the myths, frankly, promoted by the left of all people, which I find astonishing. But you may not like the outcome, and it certainly needs change and improvement. This is not a thing that needs to be praised for its absolute qualities. But New York functions. You want to see dysfunctional, go down to Washington. That's dysfunctional. The other fascinating thing to me is how much of the blame for whatever went wrong went on the legislature. America is a beacon of liberty around the world, not because of its chief executives. We have Putin in Russia. We have the king of Saudi Arabia. We have effective legislatures. Now, they make a lot of mistakes, and they're committees, and they're often defined by their least palatable member. But we check the power of the executive, we pass laws, we make decisions, we did. And for all the criticism, Albany is a very functional place. I had a great time.
I know you did. You enjoyed every minute of it, I'm sure. You're basically a constitutional lawyer? You studied, or...
I'm a lawyer for anyone who'll pay me.
I understand that, but you have a special interest.
I do.
In constitutional law.
I do.
But you also have a great belief in politics or in political people. I mean, even with all the corruption in Albany, you're not going to say it's a corrupt legislature.
Oh, yeah, and I must pause to point out that if you're going to measure that in any objective way, you've got about 5-6% of the legislature over the past 15 years that did stupid, horrible, unforgivable things. 1/3 of the governors, 50% of the controllers, and if you want to count Spitzer twice, 1/3 of the AGs have been taken out in cuffs. Now,
yeah.
What's my point? My point is that where this stuff occurs, it's got to be rooted out. But the notion that it's a legislative problem is more of a historic distaste Americans have for legislatures and a love for executives than it is any real measurement of who's doing what to who.
Do you think people who run for public office basically believe in the common good?
Well, that's been my experience. Basically, and most are the operative words. There are, in a group of 212 or 13 people, however many we have now in Albany, you're going to get your fair share of saints and thieves. And where you have thieves, they've got to be rooted out. What Bahara's doing makes a lot of sense. But the notion that the system is itself fundamentally corrupt. No one's handing anybody envelopes full of cash to get more school aid. No one is amending the environmental laws because someone slipped them $5,000 in an envelope in a hallway. The real corruption, by the way, is legal. It's the hundreds of millions of dollars that flow in campaign contributions. The thievery, as bad as it is, and it's terrible, is not defining of the system.
But why can't then the legislature legislate meaningful campaign finance, meaningful ethics bills?
Well,
why is that difficult?
No
Why
one knows
won't
what
they do
meaningful
that?
ethics bills are.
Right.
Because
that's true.
What you say is meaningful, everybody else says isn't, blah, blah, blah. To define campaign finance, remember there's one big problem. As long as Citizens United is the constitutional law of the land, there are ways to get around any campaign finance law.
All right, but even before that.
Well, there are political reasons as
so
well.
It's the power of the lobbyists and the power of the...
It's the power of money, and it's there, and it's real, but it's not the thieves. It's the honorable people. Governor of this state is an honorable man. He raised $40 million. That wasn't given to him by people who like him personally. They have people who have an interest in the outcome.
So is it just human nature that when somebody is so generous, you're going to somehow... I mean, there has to be a connection between the money that's given to a candidate and the way they vote. We've seen that.
Well, there are connections of all kinds. There's access connections. The first call you return is the guy who wrote the check for $10,000. You may get to the guy in the street who says, by the way, I have a problem later that day, but that's human nature. The problem comes, and it's real, when outcomes get affected, and they do. But that's not the same discussion as saying they're all corrupt or they're all dysfunctional. Right. And it's been difficult, very difficult, getting a conversation going where you can ask yourself intelligently, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? The single best thing that could happen in terms of the effectiveness and integrity of government in New York is real campaign finance reform and an overturn of Citizens United. We should strive for that. There are lesser things we can do as well, but that's at the heart of what affects the public interest.
While you're saying this, I was just thinking, the people who are tending to vote from the moneyed position, say in environmental issues, the corporate position, they were most likely going to vote that way to begin with. Is that a way also of sort of getting around some of the corruption in that they most likely...
There's an ideological component to everybody's votes, and it's not just the right. The labor unions obviously are very active contributors, right. But they tend to contribute to people who also have a philosophical...
So it's always built in that
life
system.
Is complicated. Politics are complicated. From the time of the founders, there's always been this give and take between self-interest and the public interest. And we've sort of muddled through quite well. The intensity of the critique in Albany, editorial boards, good government groups, strikes me as well-founded in certain important ways, but also to some degree a class phenomenon, an elegance phenomenon, an education phenomenon. Albany works even when it doesn't work, and I think it would be helpful to fix it if we understood that.
So we're getting the budget now. You have, I mean, I know that you've always felt the legislature really doesn't have enough power in that budget making.
It's not me. It's the Court of Appeals that said that if the legislature doesn't like what's in the governor's budget, all it can do is delay. The choice of the legislature is a classic psychiatric double bind. Whatever you do is wrong. And
that's in the state constitution.
This is how it works. I don't want to be too
Don't spend too much time on it, because we have too much
If the governor puts policy language, like repeal of the drug laws, in his budget, the legislature can't amend it. Most people think legislature can amend a governor's proposal. Not New York. So the legislature is forced to fall back on its only tactic, delay. People hate that. The system itself doesn't work. It needs constitutional revision. There is some discussion of that. We're going to have a vote, as you probably know, on whether to call a constitutional convention in 2 years. So you can hear a lot more about this.
That's interesting. Now, I mean, the governor seems to be obsessed with having a budget on time. I don't think that people get so upset. Maybe I'm wrong.
You're wrong. And especially outside of New York City.
That's a big problem.
The governor understood that one of the ways he could make himself appear to be functional is by getting budgets on time. Because wrongly, the legislature and the government were viewed as, you can't pass a budget. Now, if you really want on-time budgets that are thoughtful on-time budgets, change the system. Until you do that, you're going to get the mess you had this year, where the governor put education reform, tenure reform.
And all of that was under the subject.
Silver v. Pataki is the name of the case.
Yeah.
It tied the legislature's hands. It's un-American. It ought to change. So what this governor did was make the biggest move any governor's ever made to wrap his arms around everything and then back off.
Isn't that interesting? You were chair of the committee, the Assembly Committee of Authorities. I don't know the whole name. I don't remember the whole name.
Corporations, Commissions, and Authorities.
So what about the Port Authority? I worked at the Port Authority.
It's a Soviet-style bureaucracy.
But it wasn't always.
It always was, but we liked the commissars.
I see.
And you were a good commissar.
Right.
I congratulate you. But it's never been accountable. It's never been
arrogant.
That's a personality trait. But it's never been accountable. It's never been transparent, and people never really understood what it was doing. The big scandal at the Port Authority isn't Tollgate, isn't Bridgegate. It's that the tolls were used to build real estate, the World Trade Center. Now, you could think that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it's probably not consistent with their charter. And no one knew what was happening. So when you look at the big decisions that affect people, not the political class, the Port Authority is ripe for change. Both state legislatures passed a version of the bill we passed in New York to clean up authorities, and Christie and Cuomo vetoed it.
Why?
Because it interferes with their control and power. It's the same argument that Mike Bloomberg would make about the MTA when we fixed the authorities are not departments of the executive branch. They have a charter that says, go do this. Governors and mayors have liked to say, I'll tell you what to do. That's what happened at Hudson Yards. That's what happened on the 7 line, subway extension. Right. That's what happened all across the board. Bad, bad. We fixed that in New York, but because the Port Authority is by state.
Is it the only by state?
No, there are tens of them. The Buffalo Bridge Authority and any
there are
the Delaware.
Hundreds of authorities, right?
Almost 1,000, but by state, which are federally chartered, there are about a dozen.
So are you hopeful it'll ever change?
I'm always hopeful.
I know you are. You're really optimistic.
And both legislatures are trying to get something done here, and something might happen. The abuse of the Port Authority is what we used to call in Italian a shanda. It's got to stop. It can stop by enactment of the laws that the legislatures are trying to do. Let's hope the governors get out of the way.
Let's go back a little bit. The transparency. I mean, so that the board, the commissioners, we want to know what they're doing, right? How do? We want to know what they're doing. We also want them to have what's called a fiduciary duty. That's what the thing is.
And that's what we did in New York, and that's what the governors vetoed. What that means is...
And you want that in the legislature also.
We want that for everybody.
Right.
You're absolutely right. In the Port Authority's case, what it would mean is they can't self-deal, as former Chairman Sampson is alleged to have done. They can't go off the track of what they're legally supposed to do because they're told to do so by the governor. If I said to you that the governor, because he or she appoints the Court of Appeals, should be able to tell the judges how to decide, you'd go, no.
Right.
Same is true on authorities. Just because you appoint the head of an authority doesn't mean you should be able to go around the law and say, do what I tell you to do.
Does that also apply to your outside income? Or is that separate?
Well, that's back to ethics and the notion that...
it has no relationship?
Well,
it does.
Everything has a relationship, right. But they're viewed as separate. The fiduciary duty for a board member would mean you can't enrich yourself at the public expense. That makes that outside income issue should be the same for elected officials, be it the governor, the controller, the attorney general, or the legislature.
But we also should understand where legislators
and governors
get other money.
Within reason, yeah, sure. I think the fight has turned into a fight about whether you have to disclose legal clients. And the concern there has been there are members of the legislature who are lawyers who, for example, represent victims of domestic violence. They don't want their names out. Matrimonial lawyers. A spouse is looking for a divorce, doesn't want the other spouse to know. All of a sudden, that lawyer... Now, you can say, look, you join the legislature, that's one of the things you have to give up.
I mean,
maybe.
It's meaningful if you represent garbage collectors or something, and then you legislators.
Yes.
That's
where there's a conflict, there's already a bar.
Right.
What the fight has been about, which is why
but
it's
you don't know if it's already a bar if you don't know what they're doing.
Well, the theory is you can't trust the members of the legislature, the governor, or the statewide officials to tell the truth about whether they have interests that affect their job. The governor has a contract for a book with a major publisher. That publisher's parent has interest before the state. I'm not suggesting the governor's done anything wrong.
Right.
But why the focus on the matrimonial lawyer in the legislature and not on that strikes me as not well thought through.
But you think there would be a way to think it through?
I think there'll be a way to think it through that will have absolutely no practical outcome on the number of thieves and crooks.
Okay.
I don't think disclosure would have changed anything that Eliot Spitzer did or Alan Hevesy did or Senator Kruger did or any of those people.
It changed something with Silver?
I don't know that Silver did anything wrong yet. Do you?
Okay. No, I don't.
Don't?
All right. You wrote a piece in the Albany Times about Indiana, which was really interesting since it's the old Albany Times Union. And
it's the HuffPost.
No, I read it first in the Albany Times.
Well, it may have been linked through.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe it was the Huffington.
I've been following for a while this question of religious freedom and what it means. Traditionally, it's meant that what you do inside a church or a synagogue or a mosque, the state can't come in and, for example, and say to a Catholic church, you must engage in same-sex marriage. It can't go to a mosque or an Orthodox shul and say, hire a woman rabbi or a woman imam. No one really thinks that's the purpose of law. The theory's always been, though, when you go into commerce, there we have laws. And those laws affect everybody, even if it affects your religious views. It used to be that there was a religious support for segregation. And there was a religious support, and there still is in some religions, for women having less than equal roles in public affairs. We have always had the view, since the New Deal, if you're in business, you abide by business rules. Now there's a force saying, no, my religion extends to my business relationships. I don't want to be the baker for a gay wedding. That is what Indiana did. That's what's crossed the line, and it's caused this national uproar. I've trended on the internet on this, which is something that's never happened to me before.
It's exciting.
It's interesting. I have, however, read the 500 comments on the piece in HuffPost, which are frightening on both sides of the question. So there's a debate going on. I think it's a healthy debate. I come down on the side that says, if you're in business, abide by the common standards that we apply to all businesses. Don't discriminate. Don't allow your religious views to change what you do in interstate commerce.
Where do we find those rules or laws?
Well, there's a
Don't discriminate in business. Is that?
There are federal laws and there are state laws that are expressions of what's called the Commerce Clause. That's the federal law. These are not expressions of sort of the government's moral view. It's a finding by the government that interstate commerce requires, for example, that black folk be able to sit at a lunch counter in Alabama. And the civil rights laws were essentially extensions of the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. State laws are a little different. They're based upon some ethical sense that you should not be able to refuse to rent your apartment to somebody just because they're black. Now, when you move beyond civil rights and go into gay people or people of a different religion, then all of a sudden people get a little bit worried, maybe it's going to affect them. Well, it is going to affect them. But if you're going to engage in commerce, or if you're going to be involved in the public square, then the country as a whole and states as a whole are better off by people not being discriminated against.
Were you heartened at the corporate response to it?
Well, actually not. Their argument is essentially a business argument, and I would have been heartened if there had been something more of an ethical concern. I guess, I was heartened.
Yeah.
I mean, you take what you can get in this life.
Yeah, a corporate thing. But you said there were also terrible messages. So it leaves you to believe what? I mean, is it surprising to you?
No. But the country is divided, and the internet has empowered people to communicate who, when you think about it, we may be better off not having them communicate. I don't really mean that. But I mean that when you read some of the stuff, it's hard. There's contempt is the governing principle of a lot of internet communication. I'm not used to that.
Yeah.
My feelings get hurt, even when they agree with me. But I'll just have to get over that, won't I?
Well, no, I don't think you have to just accept it. I mean, I think that's not something...
I think you just have to accept it. There's no way to change the culture of communication.
If we tie that into the kind of politics we see nowadays, I mean, with all the polling and the opinions and the positions candidates take to reflect what they think their voters want.
That always happened.
It always happened to the degree it happens now?
Yeah, sure.
Even
But
with the Tea Party?
Sure, the Tea Party. Look, the Tea
I don't
Party.
mean that, but I mean you have some candidates running who say things
On
that
both
you would have
sides.
been astonished. On both, yeah, all right.
I mean,
So what do you think the Tea Party has done to
well, the Tea Party is a
political
really
world?
interesting thing because it talks in terms of liberty, and that's a very appealing meme. They define liberty, though, as the absence of government intrusion. Well, the country and the economy and the world has changed. You can be as oppressed by Google and as oppressed by the utility companies as you are by the government. They refuse to see that. They view the power, that the oppressive power of large corporations doesn't exist for them. It's really, they came this close to perfect. And then they went off and became essentially a political arm of corporate power. And that's a tragedy. They make a lot of sense when they talk about limiting government power. The left talks about that in terms of surveillance. We don't. The right talks about it. When the Tea Party talks about it when it comes to Obamacare. I disagree with them, but I understand that an employer mandate or an insurance mandate has a liberty. There's a liberty interest in that, and I don't mind the discussion. I mind the tone, but I don't mind the discussion. I find that it breaks down when only some forms of impingement on liberty are worth arguing about, not all forms.
How do you feel about all the attempts to restrict voting access?
Well, I think that's been an illuminating problem for the Republican Party and for some of the Tea Party. There's no excuse, none, for any of these efforts to suppress voter participation. And when they do that, they forfeit whatever other credibility they might arrive. You know, a lot of the voter suppression tactics originated by folks in New York. There's some very interesting people who are still active in New York Republican politics, who I met when I was down in Florida doing Al Gore's attempt to win that election. There's no secret about what happened there. I actually have a Palm Beach County voting machine from the butterfly ballot. I bought one. And I took it to Antiques Roadshow.
Oh.
And they said it was worth $3,000 if I could find someone who would buy it. And I've been unable to do that.
How much did you pay?
I paid $250 for it. But the voter suppression movement is the most troubling aspect of right-wing politics today. There's no excuse for it. There's no voter fraud of any substantial kind. It's an attempt to change outcomes. And honorable members of the Republican Party should walk away from that fast.
What New York State has never been able, the legislature has never been able to make our voting easier. Why?
What do you mean by easier?
Well, I mean same-day registration or things like that.
A lot of things have made voting
they've changed
easier.
Yeah.
What they've
Reapportionment?
Well, you're throwing a lot at me here. Now, one crisis at a time, Ronnie.
All right.
Making voting easier. New York doesn't have a lot of obstacles to voting, and it won't.
Doesn't have a lot of
Obstacles to voting. The reapportionment issue is a political problem that has lots of causes. New York has been victimized not so much by congressional or assembly districts, but in the Senate, drawing up the Senate districts. But you know, there's a political remedy to that.
You're talking about state.
Yeah. That's who does the reapportionment even of congressional
Right, but it has resulted, hasn't it, also in our delegation in Congress, no?
You know, the fact is that the great majority of New York is either Republican or Democrat. If you come to the west side of Manhattan, where you live,
Right.
you can draw a district that would elect a Republican or have one
I still
close.
remember the name of the only Republican in my civics class at high school,
William Ryan.
Bruce Goldstone, and that was many years ago. It was music and art, and it was all
That
West Side.
That tradition stays. If you go to the southern tier of New York, you're not going to elect a Democrat. There are swing districts. They are sometimes tilted. But politics is not an academic exercise. And the way, it ought to stay with elected officials, but there ought to be some better rules.
Yeah, it's nationally, it's a problem, though, the reapportionment.
It's nationally a problem
and it's
to
had
some extent because of the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
And you've seen that in an Alabama decision that just came down from the Supreme Court, where black folk were packed into districts that assure black representation, but it meant that the rest of the districts were lily white and Republican.
And it's also, elected Republican state legislatures that I think may not have been Republican.
I would go easy on the notion that that's a reapportionment phenomenon solely. The voters of those states, angry, not angry, right, wrong, smart, dumb, made those decisions. Those legislatures reflect those states.
So do you have great confidence in the voters of this country?
Well, you know, every time I hear the world's going to hell in a handbasket, they did elect Barack Obama twice, and they're going to elect Hillary in 2 years.
As the first woman?
Yes, as a
Major
good
achievement.
as a good president.
Right.
And the rest of that is wonderful, and I'm a great believer in having emerging constituencies emerge. But her human characteristics, I think, are going to define that election, and I think that's what's going to elect her.
So we think that legislators, I mean, you're just so optimistic and generous about the politics. I love it.
I was 6'2" when I got into the legislature, Ronnie. I'm 5'8" now. It is not an easy and always smiley process, but it's the best that the human condition has come up with. And our legislatures remain the heart and soul of our democracy. After you think about that, if I were to ask you a question, name one legislative body that in your opinion is completely functional and successful, what would you say?
I don't know.
So you hate legislatures but love the concept.
I don't even hate the legislators. Anyway, please, we can read your opinions in Huffington Post and the Albany Times-Union.
Please.
And thank you so much for coming.
It's always great to talk.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.